Hello, everybody, and welcome to Live in the Studio with Obsessed today. And this is a first for us. Live, we've got a panel, and we're having a discussion about domestic violence, but male victims of domestic violence, which is a topic that is not often discussed. Actually, I think rarely discussed. And in the studio, we have four people who are going to share their stories, as well as our in-house lawyer, Renee Zacharyson. And off to my right, I have James Frederick, Darren Clark, and Sarge Jemison. These two have been on before for other reasons, so we brought them back. But he's going to behave himself. But what we really want to do is we really want to have a discussion and blow the lid off why men are not coming forward and why we seem to think that men can't be victims of domestic violence. And that's not to diminish the female victims of domestic violence, because, as we say, domestic violence is everybody's business. But we really want men to feel safe to be able to say, hey, my life's shit, I'm not having fun, and this is not where I want to be, and not be laughed at by the police, the establishment, their friends, or their families. So I want to start with James. So, James, when you first discussed with someone and said, hey, this is happening in my life, what was the response that you got?
When I first started to seek help, police told me that if I continued, that they could come and arrest me, and that if I continued, they'd also remove me from the house and issue an order against me. Didn't make any sense. I'd also called the men's line and found out they weren't in any position to help either. They were there simply to talk to perpetrators. Partly because we've got a system that's based on what they call the Duluth model, created in 1981 by a group of researchers over in the US. And if that model was created today, it wouldn't even make the academic standards that are in place. But this is what the world is now dealing with, a flawed model that says that men are capable of violence, women are incapable of being violent or abusive, and as a result, we've got a really inequitable system.
Oh, actually, I'm sitting listening to you, just going, "This is absolute madness," and I'm scared, Annette. I've got a son. You know what I mean? For him to actually grow up in this type of society, I mean, when's it going to stop? It's crazy.
Renee, is that quite common, James' experience?
Give me the mic.
Yeah, it is actually. Unfortunately, men aren't particularly aware of the places where they can go to. They can call DV Connect now. Looking, I was saying earlier that we had a Not Now, Not Ever report published by the government. It didn't even touch really on men, children, elder abuse, disabled abuse, none of that. It was just purely basically for women. And, I'm no one, all lives matter. It's not just about one gender. It's not gender specific.
Yeah.
It's all genders. So, yeah, unfortunately, unless the police are properly trained, and in New South Wales, they actually have designated police stations now for domestic violence.
Can I just ask, can I go back to you? Like, how crazy is that? Like, how does that make you feel, right? So you're in this awful domestic violence situation and you're reaching out for help and there isn't any. So it's like a double whammy, right?
Yeah, you're right. I didn't have anywhere to go. I found that there aren't any suitable shelters for men either, particularly ones that if you've got children, you can't take your children with you to protect them. At least not in Brisbane. There's one that's opened up in Bundaberg that's completely privately funded. But other than that, there's nowhere for men to actually go that's safe to get away. So for me, I was feeling very trapped. I was lost and I really didn't know what to do. I like to say that I'm lucky that I left the situation on my feet rather than on my back.
Mm. Now, Sarge, like you're a pretty big bloke, you know, you got muscles going on, you're a personal trainer. When you shared with your friends and family that you're in a domestic violence situation, did you have a similar experience to James?
So for me, it was like I didn't know how to say this. I didn't know how to speak to people about it. For me, this has only been a realization since COVID because we've all kind of been locked up. So I've had a couple of women in my life that have entered that have been the victims of domestic violence. So, and I really wanted to side with them and find out what it was that made perpetrators do this. So I started to research and study it. And then I started to realize that some of my previous relationships, that's what I was involved in. I didn't even know it at the time. I didn't even understand. I knew something was wrong, and I knew that there was a lot of mental abuse, but I didn't realize what it was called. I hadn't looked it up, and I hadn't spoken to anybody about it because most people think that domestic violence doesn't start until the first punch is thrown. So, and it was actually the last night of the last time I saw my ex-girlfriend that she actually physically assaulted me. But for the 3 years leading up to that, it was a lot of mental abuse that I didn't even realize like how to name it or how to.
Did you just kind of think, well, this is how relationships are, you know, this is what happens when you disagree with someone?
Look, no, I recognized early. I've been in a couple of domestic violence relationships now when I look back, and I knew things were wrong. But a lot of men are a little bit more logical thinking, and being a tradesman and being a personal trainer, I like to fix things. So I have gravitated a few times to a woman who I thought, okay, maybe I can help her. Maybe through osmosis, my goodness can rub off on her, and then we can be in a really awesome relationship together. But leopards don't change their spots. But what you'll start to see, they have highs and lows, and then when they kind of get backed into a corner, they go, okay, oh no, I've got some problems. I need to see someone. I want to fix it. But then the next day they're back to their old tricks. And so just when you think you're making inroads on and making starting the upward journey to a good relationship, all of a sudden it just turns around. So, and I didn't realize that was happening at the time. And I just kept thinking, this will change one day. One day she's going to see what she's doing to me. She's going to see this gaslighting, making me feel inadequate. Like it's going to change, and she's going to realize it. But it never happened.
What I'm hearing is what we hear, but a lot of, and there's a lot of support for in every country. But with men being the perpetrators, it's identical, just with a different gender.
Yeah, and so I'll just finish off. It's only come to my attention in the last little while when I've been doing a lot of research in the last few months, and the big thing is that men are more likely to be the perpetrators of domestic violence, and the big realization I've got now is, and it's not men or women, it's people with mental health issues and people that have personality disorders, people that are neurotic and have narcissistic personalities that don't actually realize what they're doing. So this isn't a gender thing. This is mental illness thing.
Yeah, wow. I was actually just about to say that.
Renee, is that your experience that there are common traits for perpetrators of domestic violence, be it men or women?
Definitely. We see a lot of it. It's the gaslighting, the emotional side of things is very pertinent when it comes to it. When someone comes in and says, I need to make an application, I haven't actually been physically touched, but these are the things they're doing. And I'm like, how long has this been going on for? And sometimes it's been going on for 2 or 3 years. And it just hasn't, they've become isolated from friends and family. They feel like they've got no self-esteem. And this is because they're continually told that they're worthless.
And that they've got no help, they've got nowhere to go.
Yeah,
and
that's right. And their friends don't like them. Their family don't love them.
Yeah.
Or, they get called 20 times a day. Where are you? Where are you? Or the text message. I mean, the text messages are huge. I know people that have been texted 40 times in one day. Yeah. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you?
Yeah.
And they're off visiting with a family member, but because they're not being trusted as such. And it's the financial as well. So some people, money goes into a joint bank account, but you're only allowed to have $100 this week.
Lots of head noddings going on in the studio.
Yeah.
Darren, over to you. What was your experience? Is it similar to our other panelists?
Oh, absolutely. And sort of touching on what James said as well, that it's not so much that it's whether it's males are the perpetrators or the females. Males are less likely to come forward. They're less likely to, who do you tell? You know, you can't tell your mates. They'll laugh at you and say, mate, you're letting a woman beat you up. You know, you become the joke. You know, you can't go and tell, you know, family, because you don't want family to get involved, especially if you're in a bad situation. In my situation, I had a lot of financial arrangements attached to the house that we lived in. I had a business, I had employees, and, you know, I had children. And I always had the threat that if you leave me, you're going to lose all of that. You're going to have to fight.
So that's
like
hanging over
nobody's
your
business.
head.
And as a male, you're always of the belief that when things get really tough and you've got to go to court, 9 times out of 10, the woman's always going to get what she wants. So you've always got to have that in the back of your mind, that that's the way it goes, because we've been brought up that way. It may not be the case, but it has been in the past. And we've got to, you know, you've got to sort of protect what you've got and try, and that includes your integrity. You've got to try and protect your own integrity, so you're less likely to tell people about this issue.
Yeah. I'm still sitting here just going, oh my God, because domestic violence against women is crazy daisies and it's terrible, but it's terrible with support. They have support. There's places to go. So I can't even imagine, and it actually makes me feel a little bit teary. Imagine what it would be like for you guys to go through this situation and have nothing. Like, so what's the bloody point? Or very little. So what's the point? Australia, listen.
It's interesting because many years ago, I worked for newspapers, and one of the things we had to do was we had this bank of police radios. So whatever happened, you'd tell the journalist on the road, you've got to go here. And even back in the 90s, the volume of calls for domestic violence were quite incredible. But back then, the newspapers wouldn't cover anything about domestic violence. I mean, this is only 25 years ago. And now, like as Hayley just said, women who are victims, you know, the supports that they're starting to catch up. I'm going to go to you, Sarge. What do you think that we can put into place to help men feel that there is a space for them to come forward and get the help that they need?
Good question. This is something that I've been really thinking hard about in the last few weeks. And if we look at what's illegal, so what can we go to the police? What can we, you know, there's not a lot. Most domestic violence, if it's mental abuse, it's not even against the law until, and a friend of mine who's a police officer decided to tell me this last week, if a DVO is produced and you apply for that, then anything that's listed on the DVO, well, then it becomes a crime and then you can't do it. But until that happens, then most domestic violence is not a crime. And so my big thing was, especially for men, because I think it was like I looked at a list of shelters that people could go to as a victim of domestic violence, and it was like 200 across Australia, but only one of them also catered to men. I think it was in the middle of Victoria somewhere, or it was just out of the middle of nowhere.
Crazy.
So it needs to start with your close family and friends, those people that you should be able to talk to about anything and say to them, look, this is what's happening. Is this right? Because it just doesn't seem right. It has to start at home, or it has to start with your close social network, because then it doesn't matter as much if there's no actual funded shelters to go to. That should be the next thing. So family and friends first, then if there's a shelter, and then if it's really, really bad, then you go to the police if it can't be sorted out then. Otherwise, it's just going to be a never-ending battle of, people, domestic violence orders going here and there. And, and then the other thing is too, sometimes the perpetrator will try to cut you off as the victim, and they will pretend that they're the pretend they're the victim, and to get in before you.
Yeah.
So, and it's usually all these personality types that I've been learning about lately. A very agreeable person, and I'm a very agreeable person. We become to the victims more often because we're an easy target.
Yeah.
So, And then we're most likely not wanting to go to the police or talk about it because we're not that way. We're not designed that way in mentally. So,
well, can I say, like, I'm all for women's empowerment, right? Like, and I'm a big fan of it, and I've been members of networks
As
and all the rest
woman,
of it.
I'm down with that.
Right. So, do you think maybe the equilibrium has heavily and dramatically and super quickly shifted? Do you think that maybe that there is very little, and it's almost like a disempowerment movement at the expense? I mean, I want to empower women because I've got 2 daughters, but at the expense of our sons and our men and our, you know.
In some ways, yes. Now, particularly around domestic violence and even so far as family law, which they're somewhat intertwined in the way that they are. It has swung the other way, probably way too far. Yeah. In some ways, there's a lot further for women to go as well, where men do have things better. But at the end of the day, it's not a gendered issue in the first place. Should never have been a gendered issue.
I see so much separation. Like, there's just so much, like, you know, like, and I hear it all the time. People are like, yeah, but men have had the upper hand for years. I'm like, you don't solve, in my view, you don't solve an issue with heavily weighting the same issue, but for a different side.
You can't fill half a hole.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Good point.
Look, it's, the Australian Bureau of Statistics from a couple of years ago stated that, and it was only about the physical aspect of it, that 1 in 6 women were being physically abused and 1 in 16 men. But then you got to ask, okay, so how much of that being underreported? Yeah. How many women are not coming forward and saying it? But then how many women are coming forward and falsely saying it? So then that skews the results. But then 1 in 16 men, I reckon it's closer to 1 in 4. And you would know because, Renee, you deal with this on a daily basis, that I would say that, just throwing figures out there, that probably only 1 in 4 men might even even report it. So, and then, but honestly, and this is what I'm going to say, who cares if it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4? It's happening. It doesn't matter if it's happening to this gender slightly more than this gender. It's just happening, and it needs to stop.
Can I, very quickly, I want to ask, like, what? No, you go. You're right.
Okay.
I let that flow. No, you're right. Go.
So, first of all, I just wanted to say, just so that we can be clear on it, there's 2 types of domestic violence application forms. So there's the one brought by you on a civil basis, and you can outline whatever it is. So emotional, financial, physical, the whole lot. The police will only be involved where they've been called or it's been reported to, and they're the ones that bring that application. So that is automatically a criminal one. So where you've received a temporary protection order or even a proper order once it's gone through the process, if somebody breaches that, it then becomes a criminal issue. Okay, just to clear all that up. So it doesn't necessarily have to be reported to the police in the first instance. And if the courts think it's bad enough, they will make the the temporary protection order straight away, right there and then. So if that person breaches it, you can then get them breached on it. So just wanted to make that clear with everyone so that they're aware of that.
Can I very quickly ask, have any of you guys been accused of domestic violence and it's an absolute crock of shit and they've just completely and outright lied?
Yes, I have. I can't really discuss it, but yeah, I've been through that process, and it's a really expensive process to defend. It cost me about $3,500 for a barrister for a day to have the matter thrown out of court.
That's crazy. And just that's what was going to be my question. What are the ramifications for a woman or man or someone that accuses someone of domestic violence and it's found to be categorically false?
Nothing.
That's shit.
Absolutely.
So you can just make it and go.
You can just make up.
Yeah, and the courts are filled with them. Absolutely filled. I think some of the magistrates are actually starting to get sick of seeing them, and they can tell when it is.
Goosebumps.
So they're being used as a tool to get back or punish the men who have.
Well, yeah, either way. So there's sometimes I call them revenge applications. Generally, it's what they are, and I would dare say 7 out of 10 times there's family law proceedings on foot because whoever's got the kids may all of a sudden, slap a DV application against the ex so that they can't have contact because they think it's going to stop the ex from having contact with the children. But in matter of fact, it doesn't, because if there's a family court order in place, the magistrates will order, with the exception of family court orders, full contact.
Can I just add, they're the ones that actually make it to the police and get reported. But a big issue with why men don't report, and some women don't report, is that, and on the last night that I was face to face with my ex-girlfriend, she hit me. She was trying to take something off me. I said, I can plainly see you want to hit me, so hit me, and she hit me. So some people might argue, well, I invited her to hit me. However, the fact is, if I asked you to kill me, would you do that? It's going to be against the law. So it's still against the law, even if I say hit me. So she hits me. I stood back and I said, get off my property. You've just hit me, or I'll call the police. She looked me up and down and said, well, you just hit me in the breast, so call the police. And I then went, okay, you're going to play this game? And I called my new flatmate down, who was a 50-something-year-old woman, who that's probably going to be my best support in this case. Called her down and I said, can you please witness what's happening? I've just been assaulted by my ex-girlfriend. She's now accusing me that I've hit her, and I've never hit a woman in my life. And I just need her to leave the premises, or I'm going to call the police. And so she was escorted off the premises, yelling abuse like crazy woman. And and that was the last time I saw her face to face. But why didn't I report that? Because I was scared that the police would come and take me away, or charge me for something I didn't do.
The ramifications.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow.
Darren, it's been you've said that in your experience, it's been a while since you broke up with your partner. What's been the long-term impact on you in terms of carrying that around with you?
Look, since I left, those years ago, I think I can say categorically that my life has improved as far as my mental state, because I'm actually in a relationship now where I'm very happy, and there's no drama whatsoever. There's no fight for control. You don't have to tiptoe. I used to drive home and I used to ring up on the phone. Oh, hey, how you going, dear? Do you want me to bring home something for dinner? So I could get a vibe on what the mood is like at home. Not because I wanted to get something, on the way home for dinner. And sometimes I would get a feeling things aren't right. And I drive around the block 3 or 4 times, think I don't even want to go home. I don't have that feeling anymore. That's not how I am. And sort of touching back to where we were before, as far as do people report, reporting thing. My ex-wife wanted everyone to think that everything was hunky-dory at home. She didn't want anybody to think there was an issue. She didn't want anyone to know that there was any DV in the home. She didn't want anybody to know that she was, doing her nana from time to time. She didn't want, the only people who knew about that was myself and my children. They were the only people. And the ramifications on my children since then have been far worse than the ramifications on me. My children don't have a very good relationship with their mother. That's a very sad situation, but it's because they could see what she was doing and what she was doing to other people around her, and they don't want to continue on with that experience.
It seems to me that children become the pawns in these situations.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, it's not necessarily just the immediate impact. It is the long-term impact, not just on children, but on family members that are involved in helping, friends. The ripple effect it's crazy. And it can go through generations.
It's a very, very sad effect, even on herself. On herself, it's a very sad effect, because it stopped her from having the relationship with her children that she should be having. That's regardless of what's ever happened with me and her, that is their mother. And the fact that they don't want to tolerate some of her traits. My daughter's 23. She keeps away from mum. She keeps well away from mum because mum doesn't bring any joy to her life. That's exactly how she puts it.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. It's okay. And this is the other thing. Most people think there's family, so you've got to stick with it, and you actually don't. You don't have to stay in any toxic situation or toxic environment, regardless of blood or whatever have you. That's actually, I actually think that's commendable because it's a hard thing to do to pull away from a parent.
Can I just say this quickly? Because I just did a post on this within the last week that people think blood is thicker than water, but that true saying is that blood of the covenant is thicker than water from the womb, which means that those friendships that you forged based on trust, loyalty, respect, and all that are far, far stronger. I don't talk to my father, and I don't talk to my mother, and I don't talk to my brother at the moment because my life is far better off not having those toxic DNA relationships. And the person who was my father figure was my grandfather. He wasn't even DNA, wasn't even blood, and he was the one guy that meant the most to me. So yeah, so blood thicker than water. That's
just to add to all of that. I volunteer online to assist people who have been through domestic violence and family law issues, and just on the social side of it, I've got a master's that's centered around leadership, and did a few subjects on community-based leadership in there, and I chose to cover these subjects. And what these stories are very common. It's very common for anyone that's going through a relationship breakup to use the a domestic violence application in the magistrate's court to gain an upper hand, and before it even hits family court. And until recently, it's been sitting that the judge sees that they take it as a history of violence, and they base the whole case around that. And typically, it's fathers who lose out. A lot of the time, the dads lose access to their children completely.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm loving this question. Actually, it's just flashed up, and it says, question have any of you guys been diagnosed with mental health issues as a result of your DV and separation experience?
I have.
Yep.
I've seen several psychologists. I still see a psychologist to deal with it. I was diagnosed with complex PTSD.
Wow.
More recently, my current psychologist has said that most of the symptoms are gone, which is great.
That's great. That's awesome.
The thing about the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD is that PTSD eventually goes away, usually after a couple of years. Complex PTSD never, ever goes away completely. It's always going to be there.
Do you know, I saw a post like this morning on Facebook, and it was a woman that was raising a hand to a man, and all these people, and it was literally, they were asking, what do you see here? People like, he's cheated, he's a cheating bastard, this, that, and the other. And I'm just thinking, could you imagine if the roles were reversed and you saw a man like,
yeah,
but for her, it's okay because he's cheated, or for her, or it's the dramatic, romantic kind of, and it's in the movies, right? It's in our TV screens.
It's treated as a joke.
Well, it's also treated as kind of like that, fast, furious, it's a romantic thing. That's how you love somebody, like it's,
slap them across
the face. It's kind of.
I heard someone once say, if she hasn't hit you once, she doesn't love you.
Wow.
Okay.
That was an attitude
That's
that someone, and I look at that now and go, that makes absolutely no sense.
So I think that then this is a good lead into culture, because I know I've talked about people having personality disorders and mental health issues, but culture is something that is massive when it comes to, especially hand-me-down, like my grandfather did it, so my dad did it, so now I do it, and that's a bad culture to get into. That is that toxic masculinity that gets bantered around, and we don't want to be blaming all men for that, just because some men are there, and then some women are too, because I've seen women that are very not physical but very mentally manipulative with their husbands, and I've seen that firsthand, and I've always said to myself, I'm never going to let myself get into that. But how much do we then become a product of our parents? Because I have actually entered into relationships like that.
And we'll wrap it up on you, Renee.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I was just going to say there is a lot of learned behaviour. Sometimes you see that in families where people have learned, and I do say people because it's both sides, have learned certain behaviours from growing up, whether it be from their parents, grandparents, and cousins, aunties, uncles. They've learned this behaviour and then they project it onto others. I've seen it time and time again where, someone's been in a household where somebody's manipulated someone else, and it could be mum manipulating dad or dad manipulating mum, and it could be either their son or daughter or both sons and daughters go ahead and do the same thing to their partners because that's what's normal in their life. They don't know any different, which is sad, and they don't realise they're doing it. So unfortunately, and that comes down to the non-physical domestic violence type of stuff.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming in today. It's been a disturbingly but enlightening conversation, and we'll put some links in the conversation chat. We'll grab them from Renee about places that if you are a victim of domestic violence, whether you're a man or a woman, of where you can go and seek help. And James has one more thing to say. Okay, and James is going to provide. Guys, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
I know that it's not an easy thing to do, even just talking on a panel, but talking about something that most people think is a bit of a joke. So our hat's off to you, and we really appreciate you coming in. So that's it from us with Live in the Studio with Obsessed. Join us for our next chat, which will be later on today.